Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have another original Lady Night Terror scary story written exclusively for this channel. It's called Everyone Has Secrets. If you enjoy the story, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready for some twists and turns. Maria shook her head and slowly crept towards Lydia's closet, which was so much bigger than her own that Maria thought someone could put it on Airbnb and rent it out. Yet, once she got over the closet's size, she stepped hesitatingly into the open space. She didn't see anything out of the norm. Lydia owned rows of shoes, fancy clothes for every occasion, and loads of precious jewelry. But that was to be expected, considering the rest of the house. Maria balled her fists. Why did Lydia get to have all of this when Maria had to work so hard for everything? Maria wanted to tear down the clothes and cut them to pieces, but she reminded herself to stay focused. There's something wrong with this family, Maria thought, and I'm going to find proof of that. She got on her hands and knees, and then ran her fingers over the trim on the floor, her mind alert to any irregularities. She used her phone and shined a light in the vents, but she didn't see anything. She checked out the designer purses, mesmerized by their quality and style. She dug her hands into the pockets of a Chloe bag, then a Saint Laurent, both empty. Finally, she examined a Valentino bag, and that's when she found it, or rather, them. And her stomach felt hard, like she had swallowed a bowling ball, and the horror of what she was touching coursed over her. 1 year earlier, Maria laid back on her gray Wayfair couch, eating popcorn and watching true crime as she swiped past picture after picture of various guys. Old ones, young ones, guys with freckles, guys with glasses. Her eyes blurred, and she rested the phone down on her leg. She was sick of dating, exhausted by the prospect of having to get to know another bunch of guys. She shoved a handful of popcorn in her mouth and glanced at the TV, where a detective was explaining all of the different bones that go into forming a human hand. She pulled her eyes away from the show and lifted the phone back to her face. Swipe, swipe. Then she stopped swiping and paused. This guy, Daniel, looked pretty good. He wore a white-collared shirt and was classically handsome. Dark eyes, full thick dark hair, he even had a strong chin. She brought the phone closer to her face. He had freckles. That's cute, she thought. She clicked into his profile and scanned the content. He was originally from Canada, where his family owned a plumbing business. Maria paused and thought how sweet that was, working for his family's little plumbing business up in snowy cold Canada. She kept reading. Apparently, he was going to school to learn psychology. In his description, he made what sounded like a half-joke to Maria. He stated that his degree was to get into the minds of the family's potential customers and get them to spend, after which he had added an LOL, presumably to soften the blow. Maria nodded her head in approval to his hustler attitude. There was nothing she hated more than someone who got everything handed to them. Maria swiped right for Daniel. The next day at work, Maria, wearing a tailored pantsuit and heels, hurriedly spoke to her friend Joanne as they stood in line to purchase their lunches from the corporate cafeteria. I think I found someone cute on Bumble. He's a student, but don't look at me like that, Joanne. He's older, like in his 30s. He's going to school to help his family's business or something like that. Joanne picked through the buffet salad, carefully ensuring no cherry tomatoes made it onto her plate before she said, "Family business, huh? He's either really rich or really poor." Maria sighed. "I don't care about his money or lack of it. I make plenty of my own." Joanne rolled her eyes. Maria did make a lot of money, but she mentioned it so often it was like she needed to reassure herself that she had it. Sometimes, Joanne mused, it seemed like Maria still thought she was living in the house she grew up in, helping her mother pay the bills, even as a teenager. Maria continued on, unfazed by Joanne's lack of response. Here, check out his picture. Isn't he hot? Joanne gave a cursory glance at the phone. It looked like a catch. Joanne didn't care what Maria's new date looked like, but then she saw Maria's slumped shoulders. Joanne relaxed and her mouth formed a real smile as she put a hand on Maria's back. He looks absolutely stunning, but he looks off. Like his smile doesn't reach his eyes, see? Joanne pointed. Maria scoffed. It's probably because it's one of those pose pictures. It's hard to put on a real smile for those, you know? Joanne nodded. Wait a second. Has he swiped right for you yet? It looks like he hasn't. Maria glanced over her shoulder and winked at Joanne. He hasn't, but he will. What I'll give for your confidence, Maria, my God. Joanne said. The two friends sauntered out of the cafeteria to have a sad lunch back at their desks. That evening, as Maria crunched through a salad she had bought on the way home from work, she checked her Bumble and, sure enough, Daniel had swiped right for her. They agreed to one date, which led to a second date, and soon they had dated for weeks and then months. Daniel, it turned out, enjoyed two things best: eating good food and these go together as one thing, camping and hunting. To Maria, it seemed like Daniel was always going off for deer or elk or whatever season to catch something. This was perfect for Maria because what she liked best was spending time by herself. Then, after that first year, on their anniversary, Daniel asked Maria to go with him to visit his parents in Canada over summer break, and Maria agreed to go along. When they arrived in Winnipeg, they grabbed a taxi, and as they continued toward Daniel's family home, Maria couldn't help but notice that the houses were getting more and more unique. One home looked like it came straight out of ancient Japan, while another looked like it belonged in the Tuscan countryside. The houses were also getting grander. At last, the cab headed down a long back road, surrounded by trees on both sides. The houses, if there were any, were now invisible behind the foliage. Around a corner, they arrived at a gate with a security guard. Your family lives in a gated community? She asked Daniel. Something like that. He opened his window and leaned out. Hey, Brian, remember me? Brian, a broadly built red-headed man of maybe 45, with a barrel chest, grunted a reply. Daniel, how long has it been? More than a year? Too long, Daniel answered. I'm glad you're still here. With that, Daniel sat back against his seat and Brian waved the car through the gate. Beyond lay the largest and best-built house that Maria had ever seen outside of a movie. Her hands began to sweat and she swallowed. She forced herself to lean back against her car seat. Out of the corner of her eye, she glanced at Daniel, who was looking at her expectantly. Well, do you like it? Do I like it? Thought Maria. Isn't that the question? She nodded at Daniel, but it was forced. Her body taut. Why didn't he tell her his family had this kind of money? The kind of money that could buy political power or keep them out of prison if they killed someone. Why did he lie to her? Maria, Daniel asked, leaning forward to gaze into her face. Are you sick? Oh, no, it's not that. I'm just... Maria gazed up at the house. I didn't know you lived like this, Maria continued. She pushed her lips together and shook her head. She straightened her shoulders and turned to Daniel. You guys must charge through the nose for plumbing. She meant it as a joke, but she knew it came out a little mean. Daniel furrowed his eyes at her and replied, We charge a fair price. The business has been in the family a few generations, so we've had time to grow and get a house like this. Let's get out of the car. Maria's face became stony, so Daniel and his family didn't have to struggle to get ahead like I had, she thought. Daniel didn't seem to notice her continued distress, and instead turned his attention to the driver. He said thanks, but he stepped out before the driver could answer. He stretched his arms up to the sky, and when he relaxed them down, he let out a huge breath. He turned around and rushed to Maria's side of the vehicle. He helped her out and put an arm around her, apparently forgetting her early jab about his family's wealth. "It's a lot to take in, but you'll love it. My parents will love you." He squeezed her and kissed her cheek. Just then, a well-maintained couple in their 60s approached them. The woman wore loose blue linen pants and with a flowing white shirt and sun hat over her carefully dyed, shoulder-length blonde hair. The man wore light tan slacks and a loose white buttoned-up shirt. He had thickest gray white hair and sun-kissed skin that was only slightly wrinkled. Maria put out her own tanned hand to shake theirs. The mother shook Maria's hand first and placed her other hand warmly over Maria's as she smiled into her eyes. "It's so good to see you. My name's Sandra, and this is Peter," the woman said, nodding towards the man next to her. Maria shook Peter's hand. It was cold, his skin dry and rough, like he'd been doing carpentry lately. Maria smiled at the man before she said, "Thank you for having me here." She alternated her gaze from the father to the mother so they knew she was thanking them both. Sandra moved in and put a hand on Maria's upper arm. "It's so nice to see Daniel happy again. Come on in." Maria went with the woman but tugged at her ear as she thought, what did she mean happy again? The two of them maneuvered their way into the large front entrance. She couldn't cling too tightly to this thought as Sandra stopped her before the door. "We take off our shoes before going in and we place them right here. It makes it easier for our people to clean, especially when the boys have been off hunting. They come back with such dirty boots." She gave a slight chuckle. Maria did as she was told and slipped her feet out of her heels. Yet, she hesitatingly placed them on the shoe rack as she thought about how much she had paid for those shoes. "Don't worry about your shoes. They're safe here. No one gets past Brian and his crew." At last, they entered the house. In front of them was a circular area with tan tiled floors and a red hexagon in the center, around which led two other rooms. Straight through, on the opposite side of the circle, led to a fireplace with a few comfortable yet stylish chairs aimed towards the fireplace, most likely to take in the heat from the burning wood on those cold Canadian evenings. This was where Daniel's parents led her when suddenly the sound of naked feet slapping the floor came thumping towards them. Maria froze as a woman in her early 20s with blonde hair launched herself at Daniel. "Daniel!" she screeched. Daniel, now encased in a smothering hug, gently put his bag down, and then hugged her in return. When the two released each other, Daniel turned towards Maria. "Maria, this is Lydia, my little sister. Lydia, meet Maria." Maria held out her hand, but Lydia ignored it and hugged her. For a second, Maria's arms stuck out like the legs of a dead insect, but she slowly patted Lydia's back, her hand increasing the frequency of the pats until Lydia let her go. Maria couldn't stop thinking that she didn't need a hug from this spoiled brat. This was followed by immediate shame at having been so judgmental. Next, almost as if Lydia had heard Maria's thought, she backed up, one step at a time, away from Maria. She had her chin down and to the side, her narrow gaze fixed on her brother's girlfriend. Maria noticed this, and with sudden fear in her heart, turned her attention to the mother who beamed at her two children. Maria's eyes flashed back to Lydia. She didn't like that look, and she needed to make sure that Lydia didn't spread that negative feeling about her towards the other family members. She tried to engage Lydia. "How has your summer been, Lydia?" "I'm spending this summer taking acting classes and finishing my degree," Lydia said cheerily, all signs of her glare from earlier gone. Daniel snorted and said to his sister, "You don't need any drama classes." Then to Maria, he said, "Let's get you upstairs." He put his hand on the small of Maria's back, directing her towards the stairs. The white marble steps spiraled as they curved upwards, and Maria thought how easily one could slip on stairs like this. She gripped the black railing at the very thought and made a note to never walk on these steps wearing only socks. At the top of the stairs, Daniel opened the door to Maria's room. Maria sat down on the king bed, then fell over and pushed her face into the tan cotton bedspread. Daniel joined her on the bed and leaned back against the white headboard as he patted her on the back. Her face still in the pillow, she asked, "Why didn't you tell me you had this kind of money? I'm so embarrassed." "Come on. It was nice being with someone who didn't know. That's what I liked about you. Don't be embarrassed." He leaned over and kissed the back of her neck. Maria groaned with her face still pressed into the blanket. She crumpled the covers in her hands. "You're fine. Most girls would be happy to find this out. I'm going to give you some time to unpack. I'll be just down the hall if you need me," Daniel said. He slowly rubbed her back and then headed towards the door. He lingered and dropped his gaze to a table holding a bonsai plant before he looked back at Maria. She sat up. Then he opened the door to her room and left, leaving the door ajar. Little did Daniel know, Maria was silently cursing him for telling her how to feel. After leaving Maria's room, Daniel only walked a few steps before he ran into his sister, who pulled on his elbow to bring Daniel's ear closer to her mouth, before saying, "I don't like her." Daniel untangled his arm from her grasp and pulled her farther down the hall by her arm. "Don't you know how loud you are?" Daniel hissed as they walked. He stopped, clenched his jaw, and then continued, "Be nice." "Ow, you're hurting me," Lydia shouted dramatically, wrenching her arm free from his grip. "Good," Daniel answered and strode away. Lydia watched him go, rubbing her arm, her chin jutting out. Back in her room, Maria had removed herself from the bed, unzipped a suitcase, and had already taken out some clothes when she halted. She froze. Her back was to the open door, and she was holding a knee-length red dress in her hands, shaking out the wrinkles, when Lydia's voice saying she didn't like her crawled into her ear like a mosquito. Maria balled the dress in her fingers, brought her hands to her chest, and let out a string of expletives under her breath, turning her head to the right like she was spitting out the cuss words. She stopped swearing when she realized they were still speaking, and with her head still turned to the side, Maria jogged backwards a few steps to peek through the crack. At the far end of the hall was Lydia, staring after her brother's retreating form, but when she caught Maria's face in the crack of the door, she glared back at her. Then Lydia's expression slowly transformed into a large, fake smile. Lydia licked her lips before she turned and walked off into a room at the far end of the hall. Maria crept back into the center of her own room. She sank onto the bed and released the dress to the floor. The next morning, Maria awoke to the sound of Daniel gently knocking on her door. He had slept in a different bedroom, not out of some nod to propriety, but rather to allow Maria to feel like she had her own space. "Breakfast?" Daniel asked, poking his head through the door. Maria had pulled the light comforter back off the bed. She had snuggled deep in under the covers, even though it was July. Since the house was kept at a cool 68 degrees at night. Daniel stepped more fully into the room. His hair was still tousled from sleep, and he wore a sagging t-shirt with cotton board shorts. "Don't you get dressed up for breakfast?" Maria asked, a half smile on her lips. "No. Does your family?" Daniel asked back. Maria shook her head and stepped out of bed. "I guess I'll go in this, then." Maria walked over to Daniel in her thick-strapped nightgown and draped her arms around his neck before planting a kiss on his lips. Downstairs, the family sat at a wooden dining table, while a woman in her 50s or 60s bustled around the table filling coffee cups, while another woman, maybe in her 30s, put fresh fruit, sausage, and toast on the family's plates. Daniel's father and mother sat on the two ends of the table, while Lydia sat on one of the long sides of the table. All three of their faces lit up when they entered the room, although, if Maria was honest with herself, it was probably more for Daniel than for her. Daniel and Maria proceeded to sit across from Lydia on the other side. "You sleep well, dear?" asked Sandra, placing a warm hand on top of Maria's. "I did, thank you. It was the perfect temperature, and the bed was very comfortable. I pretty much blinked and it was morning," Maria lied. The truth was that Maria had spent the night tossing and turning, playing the look that Lydia gave her over and over in her mind. "Maybe you had a nightmare then," Lydia said, giving Maria a cloyingly sweet smile. "It sounded like you were tossing and turning and moaning the whole night. Daniel had another girlfriend like that. She had never slept well when she stayed at the house." Maria choked on her orange juice. Wasn't Lydia's room on the other end of the hall? How did she know how well Maria slept? "Lydia," her mother warned. "That girl's name was Tiffany. She used to visit here quite a lot," Lydia continued as she winked at Daniel. Maria could see something in her eyes that she was playing at. The rest of the family focused on their breakfast. Maria forced herself to keep things normal, so she swallowed a bit of eggs. They were simple scrambled eggs, but they must have been coated in magic, because she had never had eggs that were so savory with a hint of cheese. They were smooth and flavorful. Momentarily distracted, Maria took another bite. She swallowed, then spoke to Lydia. "Well, people see each other less after they break up." Big grin spread across Lydia's face, and she shook her head. "Oh, I don't think that's what happened. You see, Daniel isn't the only one who doesn't see her anymore." Daniel slammed his fist down on the table, causing everyone to jump. "That's enough, Lydia." Maria's hands grew sweaty. Daniel had never raised his voice before, let alone shouted. She shifted her gaze to Lydia, who looked chastened, until she saw Maria's gaze upon her. Then her face became hard, and she held eye contact with Maria while she slowly stabbed a piece of cantaloupe, brought it to her mouth, and chewed. That evening, Maria feigned sickness while the rest of the family went out to dinner. Both Daniel and his mother had offered to stay with her, but Maria had insisted they go. Well, Daniel explained to his family that Maria liked to have her alone time. He promised to bring her back something to eat, even as Maria protested that she wasn't hungry. As soon as she was alone, Maria pulled out her phone and opened Facebook. She clicked into Daniel's profile and scanned his friends for someone named Tiffany. She found 3 Tiffany's, but one was what Maria assumed was in her 60s, while the other one was a cousin. Regardless, they were both still alive and actively posting. That left one possibility. Her finger trembling, Maria clicked into that last Tiffany's profile. She was a thin blonde woman of maybe 30, with a huge Barbie-like smile. Maria scrolled through the woman's page. Post after post read, "Keeping you in my thoughts," or "I miss you." Some of them included pictures with Tiffany from vacations or other outings with friends. Quicker now, Maria spun the newer posts out of the way until she arrived to when Tiffany herself was still posting. One was a selfie of Tiffany and Daniel. Both wore winter hats and coats, while behind them tall birch trees stretched toward the sky. They smiled like kids who had just been promised a trip to Disneyland, while Daniel held the camera above them, and Tiffany wrapped her arms around Daniel's chest, claiming him. The caption read, "Winter camping is amazing." Maria squinted with her nostrils flared as she passed over the several pictures of them, including some where they were kissing. But then Maria pulled herself back into the present moment. "The girl's dead, Maria. Stop with the jealousy." Maria copied Tiffany's first and last name into Google and hit enter. When Maria saw the search results, her body stopped moving. Her breathing was stilled, shallow inhales and exhales through her mouth. All she could do was stare at the screen. Yet her heart raced in her chest, as if it was the only part of her body that knew she needed to get out of there. The search results before her said, "Tiffany Hubble, died at age 28 in National Park." Then, after the headline, the beginning of the article read, "A young woman was found dead. She appears to have been attacked by an animal and is said to be missing at least one limb, according to an anonymous source." Maria clicked to read more of the article, but was hit with a paywall. She set the phone down on her lap and slumped against the headboard. Daniel had never mentioned Tiffany. Maybe it was too painful? This must have only happened a few years ago. Gradually, she roused herself, but in her shocked state, she stumbled and fell against the table holding the bonsai tree. It crashed to the floor, spilling the plant to the ground where the vase shattered. Maria dropped to her knees, desperately trying to get the table right, when she saw among the pieces of shattered clay a camera. Lydia, Maria thought. She didn't know what to do next. Half of her wanted to sprint from the house, while the other half desperately needed to know more. Maria was quite sure Lydia had something to do with Tiffany's death. But another thought entered her head. The way Daniel had reacted to Lydia mentioning Tiffany, it was so violent. Was Lydia taunting him about his grief or about his murder? Her body made the decision for her, and Maria rushed over to the room where she had seen Lydia enter yesterday, practically crashing through the door. Inside, she found an elegant setup. Lydia had almost an entire wall devoted to bonsai plants, little shelves each holding a unique miniature tree. She must have placed that plant in my room, thought Maria. With fists clenched to keep from shaking, she stepped into Maria's closet, and after checking the floor and the trim for irregularities, she moved over to the designer purses, plunging her hand into a few of the expensive bags until at last she dug around in that fateful Valentino purse, where she found something that made her want to run screaming from the house. She pulled her hand back out of the purse like she just plunged it into a bed of needles. At first, she thought she had stumbled upon old dried-up chicken bones, which disgusted her, but her intuition and logic told her it was something different. She pursed her lips into a straight line, put her hand back in the purse. When she removed it once again, Maria sank to her knees, staring at the contents of her hand. She shook, and the items in her palm spilled onto the well-polished wooden floor. This sound snapped Maria into action. She frantically gathered up the pieces, put the purse back in place, and using her hands to push against the floor, Maria got unsteadily to her feet. She pulled out her phone and called Joanne because inside of Lydia's bag, she had found the remains of human finger bones with bits of skin and gristle still stuck to the dull, ivory-colored fragments. Are these Tiffany's bones? Maria thought. And as the phone connected, Maria placed the remains in her front pocket. After only a couple of rings, Joanne picked up. "Oh, how's meeting the parents going?" she asked. Maria could hear the clattering of pans and knew that Joanne must be cooking. "Joanne," Maria whispered. All background noise ceased and Joanne spoke sharply. "What's wrong? They don't like you?" "No, I don't know." Maria then recited everything that had happened with Lydia, from her glaring at her in the hallway to suspecting that she might have killed Daniel's ex-girlfriend. Finally, she added as she patted her pocket, "Oh, and I found finger bones in the closet." "Oh my God, Maria, why didn't you start with that?" Joanne changed tones, and Maria could picture her placing her feet hip-width distance apart and standing up straight like she did when she presented to executives. "This is what you're gonna do. You're gonna hang up your phone. You're gonna call the police." Maria nodded as she said, "Okay, I'll call the police. I'm going now." Maria ended the call with Joanne and started to dial 911 until she realized that she didn't know the emergency number in Canada. But even as she Googled, the hairs on the back of her neck rose like a mist on a lake as her phone failed again and again to execute the demand. No internet was all she could get. She turned around, and in the doorway stood Daniel, still in his evening clothes and black socks. "I used the jammer. Seemed classier than slapping the phone out of your hand." Maria gasped, and as she did, she thought of how much Daniel loved hunting. And then she thought, he got bored of hunting animals. He saw her expression, and still holding the jammer with his thumb, he showed her palms and said, "I understand you must be concerned, but you know me. Have I ever hurt you? No, but I have protect Lydia. Watching out for family, sticking together is how you get ahead. Now, do you want to be part of this family or on the outside?" She had barely processed this possible proposal before she once again heard the thud of bare feet slapping down the corridor. Seconds later, Lydia appeared breathless behind Daniel. She wore a loose, sequined black dress with a thin gold bracelet. "I saw you heading in here. What are you doing in my room?" she asked Daniel. Then, noticing Maria, she scowled at her. Maria took a step away from the pair and put her hands in the air. When no one answered her question, Lydia pushed past Daniel and stood between the two of them. "Daniel, what's going on?" "She knows," Daniel said, almost to himself. He turned to Lydia and growled, "Why do you have to ruin everything? Why'd you have to bring up Tiffany?" Lydia moved closer to Maria, but her body pivoted to Daniel. Lydia held her hands out like she wanted to protect Maria bodily from Daniel. Lydia turned her head to the side and over her shoulder to Maria said, "Maria, get out of here. I was only mean to you so you'd leave. I'm trying to protect you. Do you think what happened to Tiffany only happened once?" Maria didn't necessarily believe Lydia, but she didn't need to be told twice to leave that house. She moved cautiously toward the door, but Daniel stepped in front of her. "Please, I didn't do anything except protect my family. I never hurt anyone." Maria flinched away from him. From behind, Lydia shouted sarcastically, "You didn't do anything, huh?" Daniel ignored her and spoke to Maria. "It's not me, Maria. It's Lydia. She gets jealous of my girlfriends, I think. Maybe if you were my wife, it would be different." Lydia cut in. "He's a liar and a killer, Maria. Get out of here." Lydia pushed Daniel, who fell back against the door at the unexpected blow. Maria didn't think. She dashed out of the door and ran for the steps. Daniel had regained his balance in seconds and was behind her shouting, "Lydia did it. I just didn't report her. She's my little sister. Please wait, Maria." Maria and Daniel reached the steps at the same time, and Daniel grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "That's why I was getting my psych degree. I wanted to try to understand why she did these things." Yet Maria heard none of that. Her body had taken over, and focusing only on her trapped arm, she panicked and pushed him. Daniel, still unsteady from his sprint, grasped at the railing but missed. He tried to regain his footing as his socks slipped on the smooth marble. He tried again to catch a railing, but he only found air. He fell forward and cracked his head on the hard steps. His body slid the rest of the way to the bottom of the stairs where he lay, blood gushing from a cut to his head. His parents had come running in the commotion, and his mother crouched by his side, wailing over him. Maria stumbled backwards, still at the top of the stairs, and almost fell down herself. She trembled and held firmly to a rail. When she was stable, she raised both her hands and covered her mouth. She shook her head back and forth as she mumbled, "No, no." She held fast to the railing and rushed down the steps. She joined Sandra and felt for his pulse. There was nothing. Maria rocked back and forth. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Just then she heard a voice. She hadn't even noticed Lydia kneeling beside her, hugging Daniel and crying so hard Maria thought she might vomit. Then Lydia sat up and pointed a finger at Maria. You pushed him on purpose. I saw you do it." "I didn't. It was an accident," Maria answered, getting to her feet. "Now you just stay there, young lady. The police and medics are on their way. We all saw you push him." "I did, but," Maria began. "And I heard you telling him you were sorry," Sandra said from the floor, her voice turning from grieving howls to a cold ball of hate. "We all stick together," Lydia said. Maria scanned the room. Her eyes darted from face to face, all of them trained on her, all of them filled with hate. A knock at the door broke the standoff, and Peter swiftly departed to open the front door. Medics came in first and placed Daniel's body on a stretcher. They carted him away, and Maria had a spurious thought that she would never see him again. Then the police entered the room, and the father pointed towards Maria, who stiffened. They led her away, thankfully without handcuffs, and put her in the back of the car. As they drove off into the night, Maria felt something poking her and reached her hand into her pocket and pulled out the dead girl's bones. Maria grinned and thought, that family isn't going to buy their way out of this one. Back at the mansion, Lydia made her excuses and went back to her room. She had never meant to hurt Daniel. She wanted him to stay in the family. She wanted him to stay at the family home, but he would never do that if he kept getting girlfriends, especially ones from different countries. Lydia retrieved a pillow from her bed and screamed into it as she thought about all the times Daniel had come to her rescue. How he had never told anyone, not even their parents, when she had killed. He had helped her hide the bodies and had covered for her even when she killed Tiffany, which put him in jeopardy since everyone suspected him. Lydia trudged slowly to her collection of purses and placed her hand into that old Valentino bag. It always made her feel better, strong, when she fingered the bones. Yet, as she scraped her fingers along the bottom of the purse, and as they came up empty, her mind turned to Maria, being in her room, and her entire body felt like it was under the ice on a cold Canadian January day. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, why not check out the one on the screen now? It's also an original Lady Night Terror story. It involves a cute dog and revenge. And no, nothing bad happens to the dog.